Neil, any progress that you want to share about your Bearhawk?
I've got the ailerons working and the flaps working. So now all the cables are complete and all the control surfaces work. The flaps was quite a challenge, just trying to get enough clearance with the control arms where the cables connect to them. And they come very close to the rear spar attach points. But with some patience and attaching the cables a little differently than originally planned, I got a 1/16 of an inch clearance now. So
yeah, it's pretty tight.
Yeah, it is.
That's going to give you that extra 3/4 of a knot.
Yeah, maybe. So full flaps on that is 52 degrees.
Wow.
Yeah, and these flaps are huge. So and from the reading information on the forums, they say it really does help stop the airplane from floating if you're trying to do a short field landing. So
it does make a big difference. I've got, this is a Bearhawk. I don't know if you know, but I took this trip in the Bearhawk, and that last notch of flaps, the plane does not float. It just goes slow. You pull up and it just plops, which is what you want.
is yours a 4-place?
Yep.
Okay, well that's what I'm working on.
Yeah, I know exactly what you mean by the clearance,
Okay.
but you can do it.
And that control arm, I took the drawing, which was full scale, and cut that out and laid it under the control arm. And I could not make it work within the span that Bob has on that drawing.
Are you going scratch or quick build?
Scratch build fuselage, quick build wings.
Okay.
Well, we look forward to seeing it, flying this summer, right?
Yeah, well, if summer's 4 years away, then
yeah,
that'll happen.
Anybody else for builders or flights that have been occurring before we got the snow? But just some chapter business. We've applied for a Ray Scholarship for 2021. Dean Stickle is going to be the coordinator for that again, assuming that we get the Ray Scholarship. We should know mid-March, and then we have until October to put forward a candidate, a teenager to receive the scholarship. So hopefully everything is kind of opened up, this summer, and we can help support some young aviator, work on their private pilot rating. Okay. All right. Well, Mark Pancrantz, can you do the introductions, please?
I don't think I can elaborate a whole lot, Mark. I apologize. I don't know a whole lot about your background, so I'm hoping you're going to inform us more about that. But, Mark was generous enough, and this is not something that many people do, but to put yourself on the EAA speaker forum to offer to do this has just been a gold mine. We've had, I think most of us know that it's been just great experience with this. Mark, I won't belabor the point. Thanks again for coming, but I'm going to let you take it from here.
Okay, great. Thanks, Mark. Let me just get set up here. I'll give you just a quick little bit about myself and our chapter here, and then I will get started. And so let's see, how do I do this? I go share screen, screen one, share. All right, and you should see a map of United States, Canada, and Alaska.
Yep.
Okay, good. All right. I am going to record this, by the way. I hope nobody minds, because sometimes I get requests for this. I've had a lot of requests for this. This is like the 4th or 5th time I've done this, and I enjoy doing it. But I'd like to have a kind of an actual copy I could send somebody if needed. So great. So let me just get going here. Whoops. I'm working off screen to the right here, which will be very helpful. And we'll get going. So let's see, start recording. So great. Thanks for having me. Talk about our flight to Alaska. Just a real quick thing. I'm president of EAA Chapter 27 up here at Meriden, Connecticut. We've got, I don't know, anywhere from 30, 40 members or so. Very active with kids. We have actually had a race scholar. We've flown 2,800 Young Eagle flights since the late 1990s. We actually built an RV-12 with high school kids, and that plane is now in a club. And we just have meetings every month, and presentations we think are a big part. So I'm glad you guys also appreciate that, having people come in. It really broadens your horizons. I built a Bearhawk. You're going to see a picture of that. I think it's a really good airplane for what I want to do. It does a lot of things well. We'll talk about that. I'm also a part owner of an RV-7A, and I'm also a part owner of the RV-12 that we built with the high school kids. So retired aeronautical engineer from Sikorsky, now working part-time for the Army. So I do a lot of aviation stuff. So anyhow, but this trip is one of the best things I've ever done. And that's like the best, most important thing you should take away from this. And this is, I'm going to move along pretty quick, and it's still going to take an hour. If you got some questions, go ahead and jump in. But it's almost all pictures and stories. So I think you'll like it. So we did this back in 2015. There were 4 of us, 2 of us in each airplane. We'll talk about the planes in a second. About 3 weeks, 8 hours of flying, 750 gallons of gas for me, and over 9,000 statute miles. Started here in Connecticut and went up diagonally across Canada, up into the Yukon, farther west, and then up into, and by the way, can you see the cursor? Can people see a cursor?
Yes.
You can see a cursor, super. Cross over to Fairbanks, down to the Kenai Peninsula, and then came down the southern route, and then we headed our way back and started through Oshkosh. The more interesting stuff, whoops, hang on a second, gotta hit the right button here. Here we go. The more interesting stuff is all up in Canada. These are all the places we stopped. And as I go through the presentation, I'm going to have the names of the places and and the route we were taking from one to one. And I may come back here once in a while just to keep you oriented. If you're computer savvy, you can take a screenshot of this right now. Maybe drag it over to another screen if you have it. It's up to you. But I'll try to come back to this once in a while. But basically, it's starting here in Canada was all kind of the more interesting things where we spent time going to places. Okay, so we're going to go in here. So I'm going to start with kind of the bottom line up front. Is that you think of Alaska and flying in the middle of nowhere and all these crazy strips and all that. You don't need a bush plane to do this. You can go see Alaska and all the cool stuff up there with really any kind of airplane that's just good and sound. You don't need a bush plane. You still need charts. We're going to talk about that, how charts are very helpful, and it saved our bacon once or twice. And one of the best things we did is we had no schedule, no reservations. We only had objectives. We had places we wanted to go, but we didn't have any get there-itis. We didn't have to be there to make a hotel reservation or to do some touristy thing. We had to be there a certain date, and it really freed up our decision making. And the other part of that is we had tents and food, and so we were never worried if there was a place to stay or not. We were never worried about what time we would get there. We were never worried that if we were weathered in, we could stay in our tents if we had to. If there's a place to stay, great. We just took whatever was there and we did it, and that really, again, made things really low stress and a lot of fun. And the other thing we learned is talk to the locals. You don't know anything about the places you're going, and they've all got their idiosyncrasies, places to stay, places to eat, things you do and don't do. And that was one of the lessons we learned going through. So we're going to get started here. We took 2 planes. My Bearhawk is on the top. I've got 260 horsepower in it, so it really goes. 2,500 pound gross weight, not quite 1,000 pounds of useful. Speed's very comparable to Cessna 180. Cessna 180 is a little heavier. 230 horsepower, but still does very well. And the planes are pretty comparable. We all burn about roughly the same amount of gas. And 2 good planes for this. You can do this trip in a Cessna 172 that I'm showing you. You can do it in something like that. So don't think you have to have a super high performing plane. So the way starting off. So this is my buddy Hank. He flew with me. We have Pete over here on the left, Ken on the right. You'll see lots of pictures of them. And we all decided to meet in Pittsfield, Mass for staging, and off we go. And I call this the paparazzi picture. On the right is Pete, on the left is Ken. And they're both in this picture. I think they're in their roughly their mid 60s. And if you look carefully at those shirts, you'll notice they're rather tight. Well, the reason they're tight is those shirts are from the mid 1980s, and they wore these shirts on the same basic trip they took to Alaska in the mid 1980s, and they were probably in their late 20s or so, early 30s, and they wanted to do it again, and they invited me along with Hank. So to them, this was kind of a big deal because it was kind of going back and doing something that was special for them. So here's what 3 weeks of stuff looks like for the two of us in the back of my airplane. One of the nice things about the Bearhawk is you can pull out the back seat and put all your stuff in. We tied it down, and it's got these big opening back doors, which is just wonderful. I use it for putting bikes and stuff when I go biking with friends. So and we were undergrows. So on the left is Hank. Myself is on the right. Hank was just a super co-pilot. He's also an AMP. He's refurbished several airplanes. He owns a beautiful Cessna 195. And we kind of twisted his arm and made him come. And I'm sure he thinks it's one of the best things he ever done as well. So we were off from Pittsfield to Genesee, New York to Houghton Lake, Michigan. That was about a half a day. It took us longer to get set up. So remember, this is summertime, hazy, and flying over Niagara Falls. So pretty cool sight. If you ever get a chance to fly over Niagara Falls, I recommend it. Pretty cool, a little hazy on the day. And we got to Houghton Lake. Well, remember that thing I told you, no reservations, got tents? Well, we got there, it was late and the place was closed. And in fact, I don't think they had fuel. We had to fly someplace else in the morning for fuel. No big deal. We just set up the tents, put out the air mattresses and a beautiful grass front there by the runway. And that's it. That's where we slept. There did happen to be a restaurant quarter mile down the way. Walked down there, had some, got some dinner, had some beers, came back, slept the night. Worked out great. And we could do this at any airport we went to. If we wanted to, we probably could have camped at any of the small to medium sized airports. So we were on our way to the next place is the Upper Peninsula. So we wanted to go to Sawyer Airport, Upper Peninsula, Michigan. We're trying to beat some weather in there, and it worked out fine. And so we're flying up there, and we're coming into Sawyer, and the guy says, well, we had 2,000 feet of runway under repair. We have 10,000 feet left. Is that enough distance for you guys to land? And we said, yeah, we got 10,000 feet. And so we're taxiing back the remaining 8,000 feet after landing, and we're talking to the tower controller. Get to the FBO. We're doing a couple things. And next thing you know, the local press shows up, a news guy. What are you doing here? Turns out the tower controller's wife worked at the local news station. We had told him we're flying to Alaska. He told her, she sent a crew out to interview us. So this is Ken doing an interview about us guys going in 2 airplanes all the way to Alaska and back. So you never know what happens when you're going to talk to the locals. So next day, let the rain pass through. That afternoon, we went from Sawyer to a place called Two Harbors to another place called Piney Pine Creek. And we'd get some of these days where there was a solid broken layer, probably maybe 2,000 AGL, not super high, but really good visibility underneath. And this is pretty common weather up there, even in the summertime, but safe to go as long as you know where you're going. Lake Superior, I don't know if you've ever flown up by the Great Lakes, but they're the Great Lakes for a reason. They are big. I'm used to Long Island Sound. You guys are probably used to the Chesapeake Bay. The Great Lakes make that look like a mud puddle. They are big, and there's a lot of water. And we ended up going around them a little bit. This is one spot where we flew over. We like to stay within gliding distance of land, so we went to some altitude. So another site. And we went to a place called Piney Pine Creek Border Airport. And look at the sign here. It says Manitoba/Minnesota. The reason is this airport straddles the border. So here's a picture of my airplane. The fuel is in the United States. The Canadian-US border runs right through the middle of the runway. So you can land in Canada, roll out in the United States, get fuel in the United States, taxi across into Canada and cross and pass customs, which is this building right here. I don't know why they did that, but this is not the only airport. I think there are 5 or 6 airports that straddle the border, Canada, United States. So kind of interesting thing. So anyhow, we passed customs, got our GPSs set. So we had, for navigation, we had charts. We also had some fairly simple GPS. I had something, a control vision GPS, not very fancy, but it worked fine. And once we figured out how the designators worked on Canadian airports and how the Canadian maps are a little different than the US sectionals. And we were on our way. We're going to go to a place called Yorkton. That was our plan, to stay there overnight. So it's probably about a 3-hour trip, I guess. And just a beautiful day. You can see more lakes, clouds. So one thing is plane similar performance. We would fly a very loose formation. If you've ever fly formation flying, it's actually quite tiring, and you just don't want to do it. So we would, on any long trip, so we would be anywhere from a mile to 3 miles apart, and we typically try to stay within 200 feet of altitude difference. So just if our attention wandered, we didn't have any problems, and it worked out fine. We were just about always within sight of each other, always at radio contact. And just a pretty summer day, clouds, interesting topography, something we're different than Connecticut. But this is summertime, and we were dialing in the Yorkton ATIS, and they had some thunderstorms coming through, and there were some commuter pilots talking about how bad it was. Oh, great, what are we going to do? So our designated tour guide, Pete, had ForeFlight in his iPad, so he figured he had the entire world in front of him. He's going to tell us where to go and what to do. Fine, Pete, you go ahead and tell us to do that. He says, we're going to take a detour to Melville, a little bit to the left. It's got 2 runways, FBO, it's close to a town, can walk in, get something to eat, and there's probably a place to stay if we have to, or we can go over to Yorkton once the weather goes by. Great, we'll go do that. So we're on our way to Melville, and we get to Melville, and this is what we found. Nothing. There is grass coming up through the runway. That FBO had mice and rats in it. This airport hadn't been used in 10 years. Couldn't have been. So we gave Pete a hard time. So don't believe everything you read. So it had been a little bit of a long flight. And so we got out and walked around because Yorkton wasn't clear yet. And if you notice over here on the right, there's a little kind of a building with a tarp in the front. So you got to go poke your nose in, right? Well, we found the Flintstone Mobile. You never know what you're going to find. Just sitting over there in the corner, honest to God, Flintstone Mobile. And there was an airplane in there, kind of an ultralight. I don't think that thing had flown in 10, 15 years. We have no idea whose it was, even why it was there. So what was interesting, we were there for no more than a half hour, 45 minutes. And I don't know if you remember, in 2015, Canada was basically on fire. There were a lot of fires in Canada, and there was a lot of smoke. And this is exactly what happened, is smoke just blew in, came in from the west. And that's the sun on the horizon. You can just see the very warm tone in the sky. And the visibility went from 10 miles to 2 in a matter of 20 minutes. And he said, that's it. We're not going anywhere. We're tired. Set up the tents, break out the food, we're staying. And so again, the beauty of having a tent and being willing to camp, it just makes your decision making so much better. And it was a lot of fun. So next day, beautiful day, off to Yorkton, which is probably only a 20-minute flight north. And here's it. You notice this very large hangar in the back here. Well, the route you saw going through Canada was a diagonal route, if you remember. Well, that is the ferry route that they used in the Second World War to transport airplanes that were made or refurbished or whatever on the East Coast, actually into Europe through the northern route. Instead of going across the Atlantic, you could go across Canada, across the Bering Sea, and then down through the eastern side of Russia and into Europe. And that's what we were following. Well, they made all these huge hangars in Canada. They're all wood. Look at the size of this thing. It's just, if you have any architectural appreciation or structures and the engineering for that matter, look at these things. They're just spectacular. There are a few of them left on the way. So we wanted to go to a place called Lloydminster, working our way across Canada. Very mushy topography, lots of ponds and marsh and all kinds of stuff. And we got to a place called Lloydminster, picked up some fuel. The reason I have this picture is for what's up here, this typical non-control control tower. So a lot of these airports that were medium-sized would have a control tower that was only 2 stories tall, and they had a controller in there. But things are a little different in Canada. So in the U.S., you ask the controller if you can, if you can taxi and can I use this runway, and you have to get approval. In Canada, is so-and-so is ready to take off. They go, okay, and we'd like to use runway 25. Okay. And he goes, would you like me to open your flight plan for you? We say, sure. Very friendly, much more relaxed. And we did have to have a flight plan everywhere we get. That's a Canadian rule. And the reason is there's a lot of distance with nothing in between or not much between two different points. So a flight plan is either an official flight plan with the Canadian FAA, Transport Canada, or you basically just have to tell somebody. Somebody has to know you're going to be gone and be back at a certain time. So if you don't show up, they're going to call and they'll come looking for you. So things are a little different, but it worked out fine. So we're off for a place called Grand Prairie, which is going to be our place to stay for the night. Again, a little hazy, but still a nice flight, pretty day. You eat when you can, right? You're on a schedule to get there depending on weather and winds and everything else. So snacking in the plane is pretty common. And we got to Grand Prairie. So Grand Prairie is a pretty decent sized airport, 2 runways, a lot of commuter traffic, turboprops, stuff like that. And there are a number of FBOs to choose. And we saw this place called Happy Gas. Well, we got to go to Happy Gas. That sounds like our kind of place. And looked like a pretty nice new building. And it turned out it wasn't such a happy layover. This is Ken's plane. It's I forget what year it is, Cessna 180. And he burned or lost about 2.5 quarts in 3 hours. And that's not good. And we're only our second day into the trip. And so this is Hank, AMP. So we were able to pull it into this hangar, and we pulled the cowl off, and he started inspecting it. And right here is my tools. So I will tell you, if you're going to go on a long trip for more than a few days, bring some tools. You never know what's going to happen. I had this nice zipper pouch, and I had a nice assortment that I had gone through. And Ken went at, Hank went at it. And we ended up taking a little while. So we had some pizza in the FBO. You eat when you can. Went back there, started looking at it. Turned out what happened is one of the hoses it was kind of old. And if you look at hoses to the, I think it was the oil cooler, the hoses, sometimes they get hard and brittle. And the clamp was not clamping well enough. So he was leaking oil, not burning oil, fortunately. We were able to snip that off, put a fresh piece of hose on there, tighten it up, and it seemed to work okay. But anyhow, this whole escapade took a while. And this guy, remember I said talk to the locals? Well, this is the guy that ran the FBO. He stayed late, got the hangar space for us, got us some extra tools, free water and snacks. He ordered our pizza for us. Then he gave us a courtesy car for overnight, no charge, and he arranged for lodging. That's what happens when you're nice to the local. So we decided to give him a tip. Nice guy. So he really helped us out. So this is just a nice picture in Grand Prairie. We're getting a little bit north now. This picture's at 10:30 at night. Okay, so usually down, in the lower 48, you're trying to work your plans to the sunlight. Well, it's July. It's early July. The days are long and you're getting north. So we never left at dawn, but we would often land at dusk, and dusk would be like 10 o'clock at night. So you're not where you came from. So at this point, we're starting to head up to Grand Prairie and Fort St. John. I'm going to see if I can do a quick map check for us here. How do I do this here? Stand by a second. Here we go. Put this back up here. All right, so that's Grand Prairie. We've come up diagonally across here, and now we're kind of going up a little bit more north, and we're going to be heading up to Watson Lake, which is a typical spot, and then eventually getting up. So we're only about here right now. So let me get back to where we were. Okay, so off to Fort St. John. Again, interesting topography, farmlands interrupted by interesting mini canyons for rivers. And we got to Fort St. John, pick up some fuel. I like this picture for 2 reasons. One, it says North Caribou Air. So now you're getting into Canada when you see a place that's like that. And then down here, you'll see Hank, and he's looking up on the bottom of the engine to see if, in fact, he was able to fix the leak. And the good news was he did. So checking on the plane before we went off. And from there, we wanted to go to a place called Fort Nelson. So this is one of the first, I will call it semi-challenging legs. And that it was probably only 1,500-foot AGL, solid overcast, or solid broken, but it was about an hour and a quarter, hour and a half flight, and not a lot there. But it was completely VFR, and the weather was forecast to be pretty stable. And so this is where charts actually come in handy. Even though you got the GPS, it's nice to know you have something else that tells you. So I call this IFRRR flight. I follow roads, rivers, and railroad tracks. And you'd be looking for these things, railroad tracks, rivers, things that were very distinctive in the topography that you could pick up on the chart. And we're using that as to make ourselves feel good and see where we were. The other thing is to help us identify rising terrain, right? If you look over to the left here, it'd be some rising terrain. So if you were worried about clouds coming down, you'd know which way to go. So it's just a good thing to have. You can see a lot more on a chart than you can see on a little tablet. So coming into Fort Nelson, decent sized airport, not a lot of stuff there, but anyhow, good place to stay for the night. And we just popped our tent right where we wanted to and set up for the night. We did take a little walking around. They had a large helicopter operation, so we popped in a building. Both Hank and I worked at Sikorsky. We walked in. This was like a helicopter junkyard. There are a bunch of helicopters of different types in various states of disassembly. And apparently these guys would buy helicopters, cannibalize them so they could keep other helicopters flying. And it's kind of interesting operation. And look at the size of this hangar. It must have cost a fortune to heat in the winter. So never know what you're going to find by poking around. So just sometimes a typical lunch, be very careful around fabric airplanes with knives, make sure they're plastic. But like I say, sometimes you have lunch when you can and make do. So it worked out pretty well. So the next trip was to go to Fort Nelson. I'm sorry, to go from Fort Nelson to Watson Lake. And we had to turn back twice. So we, and this is wise. If you look out here, there was a combination of low clouds and smoke. See the smoke over here? That's from a fire. And it cut off, it just, we couldn't get through twice. And that chart I showed you of that diagonal line, that map going through, that's from an InReach PLB, personal locator beacon. And there's a system where it sends out a ping every 10 minutes and it tracks you, and people could track us on the website. My poor wife said, "What happened to you? The plane break?" Because she saw us turn back twice. I said, no, weather. So we sat back, pulled out the chart again. And we said, what are we going to do? And we looked at the chart and we noticed to the east about 10 miles or so, there was lower terrain and a river that was another 100 feet down. And we thought we could follow that river all the way up to Watson Lake. So we said, we're going to fly north. If we get stymied again, we're going to go east, get to the river. We're going to follow that up. And we had a go, no go point where if we either going to decide to go all the way to Watson Lake, if the weather looked good, or we could turn around and come back with the fuel we had back to Fort Nelson. And it turned out to be a really good decision. We got stymied again. So we went east, and here's the river. And it's a big river. Things are big in Alaska and Canada. And so the terrain is lower overall, and then we were able to fly even lower here. And what's interesting is there's a lot of sandbars. And I would say this entire trip, which is probably an hour or so, I would be within a gliding distance of a landable sandbar over half the time. And that was really kind of a fun trip. And we got farther up, the weather started to clear where we were, but over here was where we wanted to fly. And you can see the clouds are kind of at the tops of the hills. Not good. More fire. Like I say, every now and then we'd pass these areas where there was fires. So kept on following the river up to Watson Lake, and the weather was, getting better as we went up. So we said we're going to do it, and we got to Watson Lake. Watson Lake was one of those main stopping points on that ferry route coming across Canada, and you can see one of those large hangars in the background, just a very similar construction. They refurbished the control tower, and they actually have a little museum right here about what that airport was like back in the 40s, and some neat pictures in there. That was kind of in here. So we had little time left in that day, and so we wanted to go to a place called Atlin, which is where these two guys, Ken and Pete, had been before. And so we took off, and we were planning to stay the night in Atlin. And this is where we realized we were actually getting into the mountainous regions. All of a sudden, this is the very southern end of the mountain range that runs down through southeast Alaska and comes down down south from there. And we had a beautiful scattered layer with a broken layer up top. This is probably about 8 o'clock at night, something like that. And just really pretty, dead smooth. And both Hank and I said, I think we're here. This is what we came flying for. And we came into Atlin. A lot of gravel runways with no taxiways. So what we typically would do is the 180, Ken and Pete would land ahead of me. They would land a little longer. They'd go down the runway. I would land behind them. We'd both turn around together and we'd taxi back and figure out where we're going to go. What you're looking at here is a lake in Atlin. This is Canada. And over these mountains, about 50 miles is Juneau, Alaska. So that's kind of how far west we are at this point now. So one of the things you do when you're flying on gravel is you got to watch about rocks coming up and and getting thrown up by tires. This is why bush tires don't have tread. Little rocks get caught in these treads and they get thrown up. And one happened to get thrown up and hit his prop. And so I brought a little file, and here's Hank filing out Ken's prop, and Ken was just kind of literally up in arms. What are you doing to my propeller? You're grinding it away. Well, that's the safe thing to do. You got to dress it out. So bring your tools. Sometimes you go for a walk. It was about 1.25 miles all the way down to here into town, see what was going on, get something to eat, talk to the locals. Beautiful downtown, seaplane operation, a charter outfit. And there's just snow, right? This is snow cap stuff out there. And it's kind of a semi-tourist town. There happened to be a music festival going on. So actually the town was quite busy when we were there. It was kind of fun. Talk to the locals. This is the guy who ran the charter operation and owned this beaver here. And our tour guide, Pete, would just go up to talk to anybody about anything, but it was very useful. You were asking him how to get the car across and this, that, the other thing. And really worked out well talking to people. These are actually gravel slides on these hills. I can't remember how tall these were, but they were pretty decent sized. So we're on our way to a place called Carcross, and we're going to stay the night there. Interesting weather. We'd hit this on some days. We'd get these scattered layers, and we get this virga, this rain that would come out of the clouds. You could see through it mostly, but it would never hit the ground. And they just have that kind of weather up there. It's really, really kind of pretty. And topography up there is unlike stuff you've seen before, most likely, unless you've been up in this neighborhood. Water, very lush and green, hilly, barren rock. It just looked like little volcanoes that have come up. They're not volcanoes, that are just absolutely barren rock on the top. We'd see these now and then. So it came to a place called Carcross. Again, a gravel runway, same thing. Land ahead, turn around, figure out where you're going to go. Our plan was to go to Skagway, Alaska. That was an objective. Skagway is about 30 miles down this way. Skagway is notorious for bad weather. Weather forecast wasn't good, so we decided not to go. Excuse me. So again, no problem, set up the tents. But this was not the first option we had because of this guy. He came up to us after we landed and said, I got a cabin for you. You guys can do your laundry, take showers, watch TV, all this stuff. It's like $120 for 2 rooms. Great. Well, we got there and it was not a cabin. It was a lived-in single-family house, and it was not clean. And his parents actually showed up later that night. It was his parents' house. He was renting it out for the night to make a few bucks. And we were thoroughly embarrassed. We had to get ourselves out of there. Got our money back using the Royal Canadian Mounted Police. One bad decision, but it worked out in the end. So we were told you should go to a place called Cinnamon Bun Strip, just north of Whitehorse. Get some breakfast. You'll enjoy it. They have great cinnamon buns there. All right, fine, we'll go. That's what we heard from some locals. They have the largest cinnamon buns you have ever seen. And they were really good. So the thing is, in Alaska and the Yukon, everything is big. The land is big, the sky is big, the distances are big, and the food is big. Ken can pound down a sandwich. Look at the size of this sandwich. And he couldn't finish it. Everything in Alaska is big. The food, everything. So this is a long trip, right? 80 hours. You got to do an oil change. So we had planned to go to Whitehorse, which is a decent-sized airport with a real control tower, but still friendly. And we did an oil change. We ended up not changing the filter, too much work, but we just changed the oil, which is good enough for if you do that just once in a while. And it worked out well. We ended up dodging some rainstorms as they came through. But when we were all done, they had a museum there. So we decided to go to the museum. It was a transportation museum. They had a lot of cool stuff. They had one thing in particular that was very cool, which was this DC-3 on a post. And I'm going to try to run a video here. This has worked in the past. Watch carefully. It's moving. That is a weather vane. That whole DC-3 sits there on a beautiful set of bearings, and it's probably blowing 10, 12 miles an hour, not a lot. And that is the weather vane for the airport. So remember I told you everything in Alaska is big? That's their weather vane. So pretty cool. So I go back to presentation mode. Oops, I gotta swap this. Okay, so we did find a motel to stay at that night where everything worked out fine. Pete and Ken had gone to Dawson City. They said, it's a wild place, you got to go there. I said, fine, let's go. So now we're going due north, really up into the Yukon. And this is a spectacular trip. We had a lot of that virga, a lot of those showers. And this chromatic effect here, where it's darker in the front and lighter in the back with the rainbow, that's real. That's not a camera thing. That's actually what you see flying in the air. And this is when you fly through that rain with the sun at your back. And we would see all these little mini rainstorms going up. It was a beautiful day. This is probably, 4 or 5 in the afternoon. And they were just all over the place. And it was a beautiful, smooth day. And we're following the Alaska Highway all the way up into Dawson City. Here's another picture of going to topography. You can just see the road over here under the nose. And there was one point where I sat there and I counted 10 of these rainstorms, all within view. And you just kind of went around them and dodged them. And it was really quite fun. Excuse me. So I went into Dawson City and we're checking our charts and we're looking at the GPS and they go, it's up here someplace. It's supposed to be right up here. We're coming up on town. We can't see the airport. Well, it's right behind this rather tall hill right there. And there was a rainstorm, a little tiny rainstorm that was coming through right here. And it obscured the airport. We just saw it underneath as we made the turn. And from the time we made this turn to maybe a half-mile final, had to be less than a couple minutes and the cloud moved off. And that's the gravel runway at Dawson City. You see, there isn't a whole lot there, a little bit of stuff there. And so we came in. So we just, just tied down. We're getting our stuff out, and one of the line boys comes running over in a golf cart. He goes, "You guys want to see a 737 land on gravel?" Well, of course we do. He goes, "Well, take a look. He's coming in. He'll be here in just a minute." So this airplane comes in here 3 times a week, I believe it is. It's an old 737. And this is a gravel runway. Look at the dust it kicks up. So he's using reverse thrust on a gravel runway. And it was, I'm sorry for the lack of quality, but it was really quite a sight. So it turns out they modified this airplane to do just this. It's an old, I don't know what model. It's got the small turbofans. But the problem they have is rocks get kicked up in the back. So they built this rock deflector, and it actually tucks up into a special fairing they have in the front of the airplane. Remember, it's still a 400-knot airplane. And then they have this little deflector bar. They call it a FOD spray bar, where they take high pressure air off the compressor, and they blow it out little nozzles right in front of the engine. It helps suppress all the dust and gravel and stuff that could get sucked up in the engine in the very early part of a takeoff roll. So it's interesting stuff. If you're I'm an aeronautical engineer, I like seeing how people do things. So let's see, let me put this back into presentation mode here. Okay, and just a pretty picture. You can see it had rained, but this is up in the Yukon. This is really getting up there. We had a really nice flight that day coming in. You can see more of the reflections of the wet pavement and some of the low lingering clouds that had come through. So I just like this picture, filling my Bearhawk with my my survival vest. Talk about that in a little bit, and a Yukon tail and a 737. And I just kind of like this picture. So we went downtown, got a taxi into town. They came out and got us. This is 11:30 at night. I think it's about 11:30 at night. It doesn't get dark, and these guys are out here drinking, having a good time. This is the local saloon. This is like the hotel. And it's a funny mixture. It's half tourism, half redneck gold miners. That's real. It's a dirt road. Look how dirty these cars are. But there's a kind of a tourist element of there too. So there's kind of this funny mixture. We got a tour of the town. And like I said, if you ever watch Gold Rush, well, this is where they start. This is where they come back, get supplies, and revitalize themselves, and they go back up in the mountains. So you may have seen these guys on TV while they signed some stuff at the local at the grill. And sure enough, we had a day or so. So we tried our hand at gold panning, and they would take you up to a place, show you a gold mine, give you a thing, show you how to pan gold. We didn't find anything. We did terrible, but it was fun. So we spent a day, did the tourist kind of thing, enjoyed the sights, picked up, learned about the place. And so the next flight was from Dawson City to Fairbanks. So now we're going back into the United States. And what am I looking for here? Shoot. I'm trying to find the map. Why can't I find the map? Well, let me go back here real quick. So we were at Atlin. So here's Dawson City. So now we're going across more west now. And this is a pretty long flight all the way across here to Fairbanks. The thing you should know is there is nothing between Dawson City and Fairbanks. I mean, nothing. This was the longest, most desolate part of the trip that we took. And also pretty, add that to the interesting things we did. So this is coming out of Dawson City, and there was one road, I think, called Highway in the Sky or something like that. And we saw that for the first 15, 20 minutes, and then there was nothing. It was all like on the right-hand side here. And there were some low clouds. We ended up climbing over the scattered layer, but these mountains are like 6,000 feet to the tops, and the bottoms are probably around 2,000 or 3,000 feet. And turns out there's a military operating up there. Makes a lot of sense because there ain't a whole lot of traffic, and there were some F-18s roaring around. So we, fortunately, we did call the flight service people or talk to the controllers in the area. Said, yeah, you may want to move away from the F-18s on their bombing runs. So we said, yeah, we'll do that. So it was about 2 hours of nothing. I mean, not a piece of human building or road or anything. And it really gave you appreciation for, again, the expanse and the bigness that's up there. So it came into Fairbanks, and Fairbanks is a pretty good sized city. It's the second largest. It's big by Alaska standards, not big by lower 48 standards. But Fairbanks is a pretty big airport. They have an 11,800 foot runway on one side. They have a float pond in the middle between another 6,500 foot runway. They have a 2,900 foot gravel runway they use in the winter. And they have all kinds of parking on this side. There's another whole long row of parking over here. And so for supplying the entire interior of Alaska, this is where it all starts. And just a pretty picture of the float pond. So there's a lot of float flying up in Fairbanks as well. So I happen to be a float plane pilot as well. So I'd like to look at the float planes. We had a couple days, and we heard about this place called Chena Hot Springs, where you can go bathe in naturally heated springs from volcanic lava and stuff that's deep in the earth. You bet. Let's go. They had a place for us to stay. And it's kind of a little resort area. This is the approach to the airport. That's a dirt runway, and you come in skimming over this hill, drop down, make a turn, and then come down the runway. And Ken has landed again long, and I came in behind him. And we did okay. It was good weather, and we didn't, the runway's long enough. Turns out you're supposed to land the other way, coming a much more favorable direction with a much lower approach path. So we didn't talk to the locals enough on that one, but it worked out okay. If it wasn't safe, we would have turned around and come in the other way. The winds happened to be light that day. And we enjoyed hot springs. That water is about 80, 85 degrees. I mean, it's hot. And it's just something different. So again, we were blessed with some good weather. Stayed in something called a yurt, if you know what that is. Worked out well. They had a restaurant right there. So we wanted to go down to Anchorage. And the way to get there is from Chena Hot Springs back to Fairbanks for some fuel. And on the way is Talkeetna. So Talkeetna is the launching point for all the Denali climbers. So we had to fly through the Alaska Range. So the Alaska Range runs kind of makes an arc in the southeastern part of Alaska. And they're fairly tall. And our rule is we had to have clouds that were above the tops of the hills. We didn't want to start getting caught where we had to start flying around hills to make our way. And fortunately, the weather cleared up enough, and the winds didn't materialize like they said, and we were able to fly the Alaska Range. And I mean, there's snow. This is July. right? There's snow up here. So, you know, you're in some pretty serious mountain regions. Got to the other side of the range. You can see the range in the back here, and the topography it changes again to very rocky, but very flat, relatively flat. And with just some scrubby stuff, you keep going farther south. And at this picture, Denali is off this airplane's right wingtip, probably about 30 miles, but we couldn't see it because the clouds were too low. And we got down to the Talkeetna area, and it's very mushy. It's very marshy and wet. This is a Susitna River, and it runs right through the area there. And we're coming to Talkeetna Airport, which is a nice airport. And I say, but it's used quite a bit because Denali is up here in this cloud. It's right up here, probably about, I don't know, 30, 40 miles or so. And we landed and we said, where can we stay? What happened to be one guy that goes, well, I think Mary is renting rooms. Why don't you go talk to her? I think she might have a place for you. Great. So we go down and talk to her. No, I don't, I'm full up. Why don't you go talk to Margaret down the way? I think she might have a room. So we trundled down into, you know, a few more houses, and sure enough, she's renting a room. So the four of us piled into a room. Well, it turned out she was renting rooms to a bunch of other people. These three guys here were pilots from all different countries learning to fly in Alaska, because it was too expensive to fly in Europe. And so we had a good time talking to them. And there was a couple other women there that were traveling around, and we just had a really good time chatting away and talking about our experiences. And the thing in Alaska, it's different. This is a restaurant. There are no separate tables. You go pull up a chair next to other people at a table and you order your food and you end up talking to them. That's just the way things work up there. So we knew weather was coming in. So it's a kind of a touristy town, gift shop. So you be a tourist. You walk around, enjoy the sights, talk to people. And we just spent one day kind of looking at some museums and learning about climbing, Denali, and all that kind of stuff. So I really wanted to go to Lake Hood, and that's a fairly easy flight from Talkeetna. So now we're going south from Fairbanks down to south. And you can see there's a lot of water. This is why there's a lot of float planes up there, because there are a lot of these lakes and things, not so much these. And we wanted to go to Lake Hood. And remember I told you Alaska and Canada were on fire? This is all fire damage. Look at all this. This is all fire damage. These spots here that are still green, I believe there were streams that were still running in these areas, and they were lush enough that they didn't catch on fire. This is the Willow, Alaska, and as you remember, they were very worried that this fire was going to overrun the entire town of Willow. And I guess the winds or something stopped, and it stopped just short of town. So this is probably the worst we saw, but we saw a lot of fire damage here and there on the whole trip. So Lake Hood is in Anchorage. This is Lake Hood right here, the world's largest seaplane base. And if you fly there, you will see it. There's also Ted Stevens International Airport, which is right here, which is probably the busiest freight hub maybe in the world. Lots of 747s. This is the gravel strip that services wheel airplanes, all in the same neighborhood. Very busy airspace. Talked to the controller, he gave us a straight in, worked out just fine. And Piper Cubs everywhere, right? Everything's a tail dragger. Almost everything's a tail dragger. These are some of the Alaska mountains in the background here, south of Anchorage. So, so let me back up. So let me back up just 1 second here. So when I was taking this trip, there's a big Bearhawk group. More of these planes flying now than there were back in 2015. But yet, so every few days, I get on the Bearhawk forum and say, I'm taking this trip. I'm gone to here. I've done this, that, and the other thing. And I get responses back. That's cool. What are you doing? And a couple of people said, well, come visit us. And I said, well, great. Where are you? Well, there was one guy in Anchorage rebuilding a Bearhawk. So we met up with him. He took us out to lunch. And then this other guy said, I'm down in the Kenai Peninsula. Come visit me. You guys can, sleep over, do laundry, take showers, and I'll feed you breakfast. Well, you bet. He's building a Bearhawk. So we took off from the gravel strip, heading down to the Kenai Peninsula. And they have special departures up there because the airspace is so crowded. They have special departure, even for VFR. This is called the Chickaloon departure. You take off at like 500 feet, make a 45-degree bank, and turn as hard as you can, get going back the other way to stay out of the airspace for the airplanes. And this is what you see. So you overfly the float pond right here. You get above the takeoff and landing traffic at the float pond, and you go under the approach end or departure end of the Ted Stevens Airport right here. So it's a good thing we had a manual to talk about that and tell us how to do it. So there's a picture of the airport with all the heavy iron, flying iron there. And we're working our way to Soldotna. That was it. Town of Soldotna on the Kenai Peninsula. Again, very wet, very marshy, and sometimes you're skimming along on the bottom of the clouds. And just more pictures are getting there. Kenai is a very popular. It's fairly well populated as Alaska standards go. A lot of recreation, and this is Paul, and he was building himself a Bearhawk. He had a great place to work. You can see the wing hanging up here. Model airplanes, heated, and it just ended up being a real nice visit. So we stayed there the night. We're chatting with him. He goes, "You got to go to a place called Soldovia. Really pretty, not too far, and you get to see the mountains and the glaciers on the way down, the way back." We said, "Great, we'll do it. Weather looks good." So we're on our way to a place called Soldovia. And I'm going to pause here just in case you're getting lost. Go back up here. So we've come down from Fairbanks to Talkeetna. I'm sorry, to Talkeetna here to Anchorage, visited Paul and Soldotna, and we took a little trip down to Soldovia. So this is as far west and as far south in Alaska as we got. And so we're going to show you that. And then we came up here and flew down the southern side of the Alaska range, which is eventually going to take us to Skagway. So just kind of get that into your head. That's kind of where we're going now. So let me go back to the pictures. Oops. Okay. Back to here. Back to here. Swap. On our way to Soldovia. Pretty area, and you can see the glaciers in the mountains. This is a national park. I forget the name of it, but it's all protected, fortunately, because it's really spectacular. And this is why, because you have all these glaciers up in the mountains, and they all run down, and they all have the same basic look. As they're up in the mountains, they all come cascading down under the pressure. They eventually get too warm, and they start calving. They cause a lake, and the lake turns into a river and runs down. So you just see this over and over again. So again, this southern end of the Kenai Peninsula is a big recreation area, all kinds of little cottages and places. And I believe this entire area is supported by one road that comes in. Coming into Soldovia, again, a gravel strip, small airport, pretty airport, but just really pretty airport actually. Picture perfect town, postcard kind of, put this on your postcard, send your pictures home, these kind of pictures home to your friends, all up on stilts, pretty high tide variation in here. And we took a walk around town after getting some lunch. There was some restaurants open, and we started looking over the large, it's officially, I guess, an inlet that comes in all the way up into Anchorage. And we're on the peninsula, and this is big. Those mountains are 70 miles away. 70 miles. Look how far you can see. The visibility up there is spectacular because you're away from the humidity, also away from pollution. And the sun is bright and the visibility is spectacular when it's a sunny day. So there was a little bit overcast, covering the clouds, but these mountains, I believe, are over 10,000 feet tall. We had an invitation to go over there, and we said, that's a little much for us, thanks very much. But we're going to have to stick to a little bit more conservative plan. And we would not go 70 miles over water. So we did turn around, started coming up that other side on our way to Palmer, which was basically a little bit northeast of Anchorage, so about an hour flight or so. And this is where we got a really good look at a lot of the snow and a lot of the glaciers. It was kind of neat is there's this range. So if we're flying east-northeast, on your right were all the mountains and the glaciers and the stuff. On the left was flat land. So we always had a place to go. If something bad happened, a rough running engine, we could always turn left and we're going to flat land and be in pretty good shape. But we would poke our nose in every now and then and kind of go in and look at something that looked interesting, turn around and come back out. And the pictures just don't do it justice. I wish I had a better camera and I was a better photographer, but just spectacular stuff. And you see all these calving glaciers with the really dark soil in it. That's from centuries of ice grinding away on the rock and the soil and digging it up, and then it calves off and it exposes it. Just more pretty pictures of the glaciers. And this is where some people fly in with their ski planes, and they'll go in there, and their excursions by helicopter as well. Again, some of those mountains, some of those hills, this is getting up a little bit towards the Palmer area. Just absolute barren rock with these gravel slides. I bet if you had a pair of skis and you're crazy, I bet you could ski that. It looked very fine. So anyhow, Ken was ahead of us. We were coming up. We wanted to land and sleep overnight, and we had our second incident. So Ken blew a tire on his landing. And so it turned out he had had a tire go flat on him, I don't know, about a couple of months ahead of time. And fortunately, he had brought extra inner tubes. And the tire itself was fine, but the inner tube got pinched or worn or something. So hang on a second. So we're right there on the runway. It was 6 o'clock at night when we landed. And the last guy at the airport that ran, I think it was actually a skydiving operation, happened to just stop and watch Ken land. And he saw him blow the tire. So he came out and said, how can I help? He got us that jack, which made things a lot easier. I pulled out all my tools. All right, here's my zipper pouch, all the tools. Hank put on his A&P hat and we fixed the tire because Ken had an inner tube. So it worked out pretty well. Finally finished up like 9 o'clock at night. Went and got some dinner, camped on the airport. Just another pretty picture of the area where some of that rain comes through. I think this was the next morning. Just another picture of Hank showing kind of what there was, just these really pretty hills and mountains in the background, pretty barren. And so we're trying to figure out what the next plan was. And so on that Bearhawk forum, the guy said, well, you've got to go to Lake George Airport or Lake George Landing Strip. And I go, what's that? And he goes, it's a 900-foot dirt strip on the edge of Lake George. It's spectacular. You got to go. I said, well, okay. And he's actually a fellow Bearhawk guy up in the Alaska area. And so there happened to be a flight service station on the airport. I talked to him and said, yep, as long as you can land on your spot, you'll be fine. So let's go do it. So it was a very short flight, probably 20 minutes from Palmer. This is the Knik Glacier right here. You see this ribbon of this beautiful dark ribbon here again. And I think there are two different glaciers that meet. Anyhow, so you fly up the river that's made by this glacier and the lake. And we're going to take a right turn around this big hill here. And we're actually below the top of the hill. This was an absolutely perfect day. It was like 75 degrees, no wind, lots of sun. So we made a right turn. Here are all the calving pieces of glacier and coming off the river. We're going to fly up along this smaller piece of river, if you want to call it. And this is the Lake George Glacier, I think it is. And this is Lake George right here. And if you look very carefully, there's actually a dirt landing strip right there. And that's where we're headed. And this is what it looks like. So we've come up around the corner here, and you kind of see a berm here. I think this is called the glacial moraine, and it was made by when the glacier was coming down back a long time ago when they were, growing and they were pushing soil, and then eventually they stopped. And of course, they've been retreating for centuries now. And this. Okay, sorry if my headset goes out if it doesn't hear anything. But anyhow, so that's the 900-foot dirt strip. And I have a quick video. I'm going to show this to you. So you can see here's the lake and all these glaciers that have come off and they've gotten blown over. This is the moraine. You can see how rugged it is in here. This is probably about 300 yards. Speed this up a little bit. So this is our turn, and you can see here's the glacier that I showed you coming up. This is where we flew through. So we came in here and we made a right-hand turn, and then we made a big left-hand turn. And there's the runway. So the Bearhawk is a good short takeoff and landing plane. It's not as good as a Cub, but it's 2,500 pounds on your gross weight versus, 2,000 pounds if it's a heavy Cub. But it does land very nicely. I used the full flaps, and I had no trouble getting into the strip. Bonk. And you can see there was another plane there, which was a good sign. So let me go back to presentation mode. And so when we climbed to the top of that glacial moraine, this is the view we saw. It was just really pretty, right? You see the lake and you see all the pieces of iceberg that's gotten broken off and gotten blown over to the shoreline. And look what we saw. We saw two people in a canoe. I go, how in the world did they get a canoe here? We realized, well, people fly seaplanes, right? So they probably tied the canoe to the seaplane, flew in, landed, pulled up on a beach someplace, and went canoeing around all these spectacular pieces of glacier. Man, would I love to do that someday. Well, we walked down, and they came over and said, "You want to use the canoe?" Sure. Well, it turns out that canoe has been there for 20 years. Somebody brought it up there one way or another, and they just left it there, and people can come in and use it. And it's a real beat to hell Grumman plastic canoe, but it worked and it didn't leak. And we got to go canoeing around all these broken pieces of glacier. And just a quick side note, we've probably seen very few, if any, pictures of people standing on icebergs. The reason is they roll. Any piece of ice that's in water melts from the bottom, and they get top heavy and they roll over. These did the same thing. In the hour or so we were there, we saw 3 of them, big ones, completely roll over. And so when we went canoeing, you had to not get very close to them because they could roll over on top of you. So, and you could hear them actually crackling and melting in the ice, in the water. So just a couple panoramic pictures. I was playing with the 180-degree method. This is the runway end to end, and then this Lake George, just something kind of interesting. But it gives you a little bit of the feeling of expanse that we had there. Again, really hard to capture on the camera. So I'm going to zip by these videos. And just again, the glacier that comes down into the area, just spectacular. Again, topography. So we want to go to a place called Talk to get some gas because we were on our way to Skagway. Someday this is going to completely erode away and this whole lake is probably going to drain in a matter of hours. Just interesting stuff. Again, had to deal with some clouds. Again, look for low terrain, pulled out the chart. If we go down, take a right, then take a left, we can go down this valley under the clouds so we can get ourselves some gas. And that's what we did. And then we're on our way to Skagway. The forecast was good, so let's go do it. And so now we are flying down the Alaskan range on the very southern end of it. We're at fairly high altitude, 10 or 11,000 feet in some cases, and it's cold and it's warm on the ground. That's why I got this shirt over me, because it gets cold up there, even with the heater. So on the left-hand side was broken to overcast layer at probably like 9,000 feet. On the right-hand side was some of the most forbidding territory you've ever seen. I would not want to have an engine out anywhere in this stuff. But boy, was it pretty to look at. Well, we were flying right over a road that goes all the way from Talk to Haines, Alaska. And so we were quite safe because we're right over a significantly sized road all the way down. And it runs in a valley. Well, that's why they put the road there, and it makes for a good place to fly. And we just had these beautiful views, again, snow. This is about 9 o'clock at night. The sun is low, but it's still, plenty of daylight. So we were coming over Haines, and you get down. So now we're getting to the, all the inlets and stuff in the Pacific Ocean. You've probably heard stories about pilots getting lost and turning up the wrong inlet. Boy, do I see what they were talking about. I mean, we had a map and a GPS and decent weather, and I was still nervous if I was going the right way because they all looked the same. And remember I talked about everything's big. You see this little white dot right here, that little white thing? That is a 3,000 passenger cruise ship. That's how big that is. And that's coming from Skagway. Skagway is actually a very big tourist destination. So I said, that's where we're going. Follow where that ship came from. And so we picked the right one, but it just really gets you. And it actually started to drizzle a little bit. So we had a little bit of a wet approach. This is about 10 o'clock at night, 9:30, maybe 10 o'clock at night. Again, surrounded by hills all the way around on the Skagway Inlet. And we got there and the place was absolutely dead quiet. There was nobody on the streets. I think we got the last 2 rooms in the whole town. And it was just, boy, what a sleepy place. And I said, all right, well, fine, we're here. We made it. It was a long day. It was a long flight, but a great day. And the next day was beautiful and sunny. 3 cruise ships came in overnight, and they literally carry 3,000 tourists each. and they let them all out in the morning. 9,000 people descend on this town and are taking pictures and going to gift shops and restaurants and the whole bit. And so we played tourists for a day. We actually went for a bike ride, took a train ride and then bike ride it down, which is a whole different little story, but really good. And the forecast for the next day was pretty good. Great, we're happy. Woke up the next morning and it was 700-foot overcast. Not good. And the hills are like 1,500 to 2,000 feet. Oh my God, what are we going to do? And this is the notorious Skagway weather I told you about. So from 9 o'clock in the morning to 5 o'clock in the evening, we are staring at these tablets, or a tablet, with these Alaskan cameras. So I don't know if you've heard about these, but in Alaska, they have set up cameras, real-time video cameras. Actually, they're still image cameras that update very frequently, of passes and areas that pilots fly. So you can look at it and see what the weather is, because weather is very local. It can be local within a couple miles. And so they had one or two in the pass from Skagway up to Whitehorse. And we just sat there and watched it very slowly rise, because we said we had to get out that day because the forecast for the remainder of the week was terrible. We thought, oh, great, we're going to have to park the planes and drive the Whitehorse and fly home because we got jobs and all this other stuff. Well, patience paid off. We were finally able to go about 5 o'clock. And this is the Skagway to Whitehorse strip. So we took off, made a turn, and this is a road that comes down from Canada, Whitehorse, Canada. And this is actually a railway that runs up the other side. And in the morning, the clouds were down at least halfway down the valley, which means you were completely socked in at the top, no way to get through. And this is probably like 5 in the evening or so, and it had gone up enough, and it was actually ended up being pretty good. And able to make our way through. This is what the topography looks like. Again, these barren hills, but you can see the clouds were actually in the tops of the mountains. So sometimes you had to find a hole and go through it, but you can see it was clear up top, at least where we were. So it was pretty safe, but we had fun going through this hole here. We made our way to Whitehorse. So we passed customs in Whitehorse. And this is where we started kind of turning and started heading home here. So I'm going to be wrapping this up here a little bit. And so we had to find a place to stay. So there's a place called Teslin, Lake Teslin, big lake. And they had an airport there. It was pretty sleepy. They did have a restaurant about a mile or so away. You know, that's just kind of a diner. Good by us, set up the tents, no problem. And just spent the night there. So we're on our way. So we're kind of heading back here. We heard a place called Dawson Creek, which is a really friendly place to go to if you're a pilot, because they have a very nice pilot's lounge and a restaurant right there. Canada's big on pumping oil. This is what an oil place looks like. These are all huge oil tanks, 2 or 3 of them at a spot, and they just pump oil up. A truck comes in, however often it is, takes the oil, drives it away. Sometimes you get pretty pictures and very still mornings of bridges and streams and rivers. And so we stayed at Dawson Creek. So if you remember, this is July, and Oshkosh is in July, and I really wanted to bring my plane to Oshkosh because I had built the plane the year prior to that, and I really wanted to bring it to Oshkosh. So we had a long day. Dawson Creek, Lloydminster, Yorkton, Piney Pine Creek, that border airport, to Watoma, Wisconsin, to Oshkosh. And so this is going back the way we came, that diagonal route that you saw before. And then we got to Oshkosh on a Saturday. And spent the day there Sunday and left Monday morning. And so we had a good single day there at Oshkosh. So I talked about my survival vest right here. I'm going to take a little sidebar here. This is actually a fishing vest that I converted to a survival vest. And I've got flares. I've got a little handsaw, fire making stuff, granola bars, space blanket, everything I can think of that I can stuff in here. Because the rule is what you have in the airplane is camping equipment. What you have on you is survival equipment. And I've done a lot of reading about flying in the bush and stories like that. And a lot of times the plane is totaled to the point where you can't get anything out of it. And so it's just like, I call it my security blanket. I felt pretty good wearing it. I had my PLB on me, very important. And Hank had something similar that he wore. Anyhow, so that was kind of the exclamation point on the trip, was flying to Oshkosh, talking to people, and it was time to go home. So Oshkosh to St. Clair, we both went there, said our goodbyes. I went to Danbury to drop Hank off. I went to Meriden, which is my home airport, and Ken and Pete went to Pittsfield. So that was 3 weeks. Headed off just back in familiar territory. Again, blessed with good weather. We really lucked out. With the days we were stymied by weather, we had a good place to stay. The days we wanted to travel, we were in good shape. This is Danbury Airport in Connecticut. If you ever fly up here, you get to fly what's called the cut. You actually fly between these hills coming in for a landing. It's kind of fun. I learned to fly here back in 1984. And this is where I did my first solo landing. It was right here on this runway. So it's kind of fun to land here. Picture of Hank and I. You may have noticed we grew beards. We all looked at each other and said, "Yeah, why shave?" And so those were 3-week beards. Mine came in. I've never grown a beard before. I'm gray in the front and brown on the bottom. It's kind of funny looking. And when I got out of the plane to greet my wife an hour after this photo, she just couldn't stop laughing. So anyhow, so I'm going to wrap it up here. So overall, our plan worked really well, right? We had the tents, we had the food, we had no schedule, redundant navigation tools, very low stress and decision making. We made decisions by consensus, didn't have any trouble. Only problems we had were the fake cabin, and we did fly to Pete. Had again, his iPad was faulty. He said there's gas at Northway. Nope, had to go up to TOC. But that's it. Everything else went really well. The PLB, personal locator beaker tracking, is really good because people could track me, and it's a really good safety device. And frankly, I go flying with them now because I've heard stories of people going down in woods in populated areas, and you can't find them because they're buried under the trees or something. And there will be a next time. I was hoping, I have since taken this plane to Idaho, and Montana and Idaho. It's gone to New Hampshire, gone camping, and I wanted to go last year in 2020, but the COVID thing kind of put a kibosh on that. So anyhow, that's the kind of flying you can do. Doesn't have to be a Bearhawk, but a Bearhawk's a wonderful plane for doing it in. Cessna 180 is also a good plane. But I really encourage you, if you have any, if this is anything, if you have this on your bucket list, wherever it is, go do it. I'm still very glad I did this, and so are the guys I went with. So with that, I'll stop here, and I appreciate your attention. I'll take questions.
Mark, what would you say was the main source of information when you guys started planning this out? Right. I mean, I've seen where AOPA has planning guides and such. Did you all have a particular planning guide you used?
Not especially. So Pete and Ken had taken this similar trip before. So we had information on those places, but we knew we could camp just about anywhere, and we knew we had food. So we knew the general route, but that's really about it. Because we didn't know exactly where we were going to be at any given night. Remember, it was no schedule, no places. So we were very flexible. And people told us in the Bearhawk forum, go visit these places. I read about Chena Hot Springs before I left, so I knew that's a place we wanted to try to go to. I had been to Talkeetna before. I said, that's a place we want to visit. They had been to Atlin and met somebody, so Atlin was on the list. Skagway was a touristy place. We wanted to go there, but that's about it. So they made an adventure.
Mark, does Canada have user fees, and how did you work with those?
Yeah, they do have user fees. So as interesting is, I think it's called Nav Canada actually. And so we would file a flight plan. We had to do that. We did it with Nav Canada. We were flying VFR. And we did get services at a couple of airports for control towers. And I guess I'd write down a tail number. So for whatever the 2 weeks that we were in Canada, I got a bill for $11. They actually, they have your end number and they have your address. And so 11, 12 bucks ain't bad. It's just, you would hate to see that go up. So anyhow.
That was really interesting. All of the people that you kind of ran into in Canada and Alaska that helped you out or
Yep.
Put you up. It really speaks well to the aviation community.
It absolutely does. I mean, you're flying to airports, so you're talking to airport type people, and people in Alaska and even Canada, they know people travel by airplanes. And we had, just people helpful everywhere for whatever we were asking, and it really made it fun.
Yeah, beautiful Bearhawk, Mark.
Thanks. Yeah, this is why I built it. I built it to take trips, right? And that's why it's got all the glass in it, it's all the transparency. I got the power, so I never have to worry about getting out of it. I can actually take off shorter than I can land if I'm light. It's worked. It cruises 125 knots true airspeed at 65% power, burning about 10 gallons an hour. And to me, that's a great speed. It's fast enough to buck any winds and get yourself there. But it's you don't have to go 150 knots, and you're sightseeing, so it worked out really well.
You said you were going to make this video, you were recording it, you were going to make it available?
I'm one way or another, yeah. This one went pretty well. I didn't stumble too much. And I hope to post it somewhere. I don't know where yet. I got to get my sons to help me out doing that.
Great. If you could let me know, I'd appreciate it. I know some youths that are interested in following this.
Yeah, like I said, this is one of the best things I've ever done. And it's hard. It just is. And I've given this talk a number of times, and I'll give you a quick little story. I built my airplane, and I enjoyed it. And I wanted to do it again, but I wanted to get other people involved. So we built an airplane with high school kids here at the airport. It took us 3 years. And that's also one of the best things I've ever done. And then we turned that into a flying club. And because I want people to have experiences flying airplanes and just everything that happens, the adventure with it. Well, today, an example of that is 4 days ago, I got notice that there was a stranded pelican that made its way in Connecticut and almost froze to death. And they wanted it transported to Florida, and they wanted to do it by airplane. There was a call out for pilots. A woman and her daughter in our flying club flew that bird in an RV-12 all the way from Connecticut to Florida in 1 day to save the bird. And that's an adventure. It was a long day. And we had 2 news stations at the airport interviewing them and the local press because it was such a cool story. That is a mother and a daughter flying an airplane to Florida to save a bird in an airplane built by high school kids.
Awesome.
Yeah, it is pretty awesome. So it just, you do interesting things happen. So. Anything else?
Mark, you said this was the best thing you ever did. This give you any ideas for your next trip?
Well, yeah. So like I said, after this trip, I went out to Idaho with some friends, and I took my son with me. And that was a 2-week trip, and that was a great trip. And I have a whole different presentation on that. And that was even tougher flying than this. The Idaho mountains are really difficult, and that is a place for a better performing plane. Anyhow, so next on my list is I want to go to the desert Southwest. I want to go out to like Utah and Arizona and some places out there. There are some spectacular sites and a lot of backcountry strips out there that I want to try. All right. Well, I appreciate your attention. I know it's probably, it's a little over an hour with the Q&A, but even if I move it along, but there was just so much, and I've only told you like half the stories of things that happened and things I learned.
Yeah, no, it's the perfect length, and you know, I'm just envious of the trip. I hope to do something like that sometime.
Well, you just got to do it. I mean, it was 9,000 miles, but it was 9,000 miles 2 hours at a time. The longest leg we had was like 3.5 hours. Typically a leg was 2 to 2.5 hours. If you can plan a 2.5 hour cross-country trip, you can fly all the way across the country and back. It's just the same thing, checking weather, knowing where you're going, and that sort of thing. Have another plane go with you. It's a lot more fun. Also from a safety standpoint, when you're flying in topography like this is all VFR. Don't have a schedule. don't get their itis. And if you do get weathered in, just say you're going to get to an airport and you're going to fly home and leave the airplane there. And we saw some planes that were been stuck there for a couple of weeks, actually. Actually, in Chena Hot Springs, there were 2 180s there that were stuck for a couple of weeks because they couldn't get out beforehand. So that's just part of the adventure. You can do it.
Great story.
So let's see, how do I get it? So I'm going to stop sharing here. There we go.
Well, thank you again, Mark, for presenting. It really is a epic trip that, you know, I hope you get a chance to do the Southwest, and you know, I hope others here can head to Canada sometime. And
Yeah, no, I hope you do. It's customs. Just call ALPA and talk to them about they'll tell you all the procedures for getting it. You have to get something like EAPIS, and it really wasn't very hard once you knew the procedure. I wouldn't be scared of it. Just gotta learn how to do it. So so Mark, if you have anybody that's, first off, I'm open, you know, if anybody wants to call me or email me, please feel free to do so. I think it was Neil who's building the Bearhawk. You got any questions, be happy to talk to you. I'm going to try to get this video. I'm going to go through and maybe edit it if I have to. And if there's some youth or some other people that want to watch it, you know, we're going to find a way to get it out there for people.
Excellent. Excellent. Well, thanks again, Mark. That was great. We really enjoyed it. Got a lot of us thinking about some big trips.
Plan your trip.
Yeah,
Do it
exactly.
before you get too old.
Great. Life is short.
Ernie tail draggers up in Alaska. You know, take the cub up there.
That's right.
Yeah, I think a J3 would take a little longer.
Yeah, well, there are people that fly Super Cubs all across the country, and a Super Cub is not that fast, what, 85 knots maybe? And that, you know, it's a great plane when you get there. It takes a long time to get there. The difference between 125 and 85 is a big percentage. So the reason I like the Bearhawk is that I can do almost everything a Cub can do, but I can travel a lot farther and carry a lot more. So.
Well, does anybody else have anything for the good of the chapter as we kind of wrap up? Okay, well, thank you everybody for joining us tonight. Thank you again, Mark, for presenting.
Yeah, my pleasure.
For the Maryland and folks here in Virginia or nearby, help Ernie out and send in your chapter dues. You know, we'd appreciate it. And you know, we'll see you around. If anybody needs anything, feel free to reach out, and stay safe.